Welcome back. We've been talking about how prices can dictate behavior, and we've been exploring some key terms, some vocab that can get us there. In the last lecture, we talked about what a market is. Now we're introducing a new key term, and that's demand. And a lot of people have heard of demand before, have heard this term supply and demand, but very few people understand it. Very few people understand how profound it is. And that's because demand is not a number. And this is a key thing to keep in mind. What demand is a relationship. And it is an inverse relationship. It's the relationship describing how much of something consumers are willing and able to buy at a given price. And that's a little bit verbose. But when we think about this, think about your own experience as a consumer. Think about what you are willing and able to buy at a given price. So let's talk about something like the market for magazines. We're all stuck at home, we need stuff to do, we might want something to read. We might order a magazine either online or from the store. Now, when magazines are really expensive, do you tend to buy a lot of them? Similarly, when magazines are really cheap, maybe you'll get a couple extra. What this is that demand relationship. And once we explore this relationship, we typically graph it. We'll graph it in a few pages next, but this graph is downward sloping. So when in doubt, remember this phrase, demand to the land. So why is demand downward sloping? Because at higher prices, we buy fewer things. So what I have here is P on the vertical axis representing price and Q on the horizontal axis representing quantity. Demand is downward sloping, demand to the land. And this demand relationship relates these two variables, price and quantity. In other words, demand is describing the consumer side of the market, and everyone watching this video is a consumer. So again, think about your own buying experiences and think about how you've typically behaved in the experience of buying something. And that should help you to understand demand. Now, to explore demand, to explore this relationship, we're going to make use of a thought experiment. And that thought experiment is ceteris paribus. It's a Latin phrase meaning all else equal. So when we think about how prices are dictating our behavior, it's important to keep in mind that the world is dynamic, prices are dynamic, markets are dynamic. These things are constantly changing. And it can be fractious, it can be difficult to understand what is causing what. But we can make use of some assumptions, like what if things weren't changing? If things weren't changing, what would you do? If nothing else was different, but gas was more expensive, would you drive more? Or maybe you would try and walk or bike somewhere. If nothing else was different, but magazines were cheaper, would you buy an extra one? And putting this relationship together, all else being equal, we can come up with a rule, a law of demand. All else being equal, if the price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. And all else equal, if the price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up. In other words, demand to the land, demand is an inverse relationship. And we can draw that graphically with a downward sloping curve with price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis. So we've been thinking about our own behavior as consumers in this demand relationship. We can also think about a market in this demand relationship, but a market, remember, is just buyers and sellers coming together. So when we think about the demand relationship, we can just think about the individual buyers in this market. So let's think about the market at Sweetbriar. Well, we can think about President Wu, and we can think about Dean Garrett, and we can think about our founder Daisy. So in this market, as price goes up, as something gets more and more expensive, President Wu is buying less of it, and Dean Garrett is buying less of it, and Daisy is buying less of it. And their demand doesn't look equal. They all have their unique tastes and wants, but they still obey that law of demand, that demand to the land. Demand is downward sloping. So when the price is, say, $1, President Wu buys 5 of something. Dean Garrett really likes this thing. She buys 10 of it. Our founder Daisy buys 5 of it. When the price gets more and more expensive, when the price is $5, President Wu only buys 1 of this thing. Dean Garrett buys 2. Daisy has dropped out of the market altogether. Daisy's not buying anything. It's too expensive at $5. We can look at these individual demand schedules and bring them to a graph. So what we see here is with price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis, all 3 of their demand schedules are downward sloping. But we can also start to consider Sweetbriar's demand for something. And what Sweetbriar's demand is just the horizontal sum of everyone's individual demand. So at a price of $1, we take how many President Wu is buying, 5, add it to how many Dean Garrett is buying, 10, add that to how many Daisy is buying, 5, and we get that all of Sweetbriar is demanding 20 of this thing. And for each of these prices, we take that horizontal sum to get our market demand. So we take, similarly, when we look at our demand graphs, we can just take that horizontal sum and get what Sweetbriar's demand looked like. And it's just the horizontal sum of all the individuals in this marketplace. And still, when we look at the market overall, we obey that law of demand. Demand is downward sloping, demand to the land. So let's wrap this video up here with a pause and think question, which is, we understand all else equal, but we were also thinking about demand being this dynamic thing. So what might cause this underlying relationship to change? Stop and think on your own. What might cause a demand curve to shift?